I'm going to talk about text lacks empathy. And this talk is sort of divided into two parts. I'm going to talk a little bit, first of all, about what I mean when I say that text lacks empathy, because I think acknowledging and understanding the problem is a big part of solving it. And once we've done that, I'll take a look at some of the other solutions that we can implement. So starting at the very beginning, we are essentially, sorry, my clicker is not working. That's awkward. We are basically hairless monkeys. We have evolved to be social creatures, and there are special areas of our brain that are dedicated to recognizing people. Even in people who suffer from face blindness and can't connect faces with individuals, those areas of the brain still respond to pictures of faces and to faces in a way that they don't respond to pictures, say, of cars or ducks. Monkeys keep their social groups together by grooming each other, picking fleas off each other. I hope all of you have had a shower this morning. Because the most social primates, the Myopithecus, connect with about 60 other individuals in their social groups. Humans have much, much bigger social groups than that. A very conservative estimate puts the mean at about 150. I reckon if you look at your Facebook or your Twitter feed, it's a lot higher than that. And the way that we manage to do this is our ability to communicate, our ability to talk to the people around us, to communicate not only about what we need, but also about how we're feeling, what we're thinking, to introspect, and to share that with the people around us. And those abilities also allow us to understand how other people are feeling and thinking about the world. Empathy comes from the German word Einfühlung, so one feeling, or in English, the power of projecting one's personality into and so fully comprehending the object of contemplation. When we communicate, we don't just do this with words. We can communicate without using words at all, in fact. And ordinarily when we speak, a lot of content is conveyed outside of the words that we use. We can use facial expressions, hand gestures, and body language and positioning. And these cues are so strong that we recognize them even in things and animals that don't have this way of communicating. But what happens when the emotion is removed from a conversation? If you get this email, what's your reaction? I'm hearing an oh shit. Is there anybody who's thinking, dude, yeah, I got my performance review and I'm getting a raise? Not really. Unfortunately, we have a tendency to fill emotional voids with negative emotions. And the more important the conversation and the more stress involved, the more likely we are to do this. I imagine most of you are writers, work with writers, know writers. Any of you who aren't, I've been a professional writer for almost a decade. I work on a team with 2 other writers in a company with a few dozen engineers. And my process when I write something basically goes, I research, I draft, I read my draft, I edit my draft, I read my second draft, I edit that, I ask somebody who isn't an expert to read it, I edit based on their comments, I ask someone who is an expert to read it, I edit based on their comments. Hopefully I then read it again, because all of those edits sometimes need a final edit to kind of connect the pieces that have gotten disconnected. And then eventually I publish it. Who writes emails like that? Who talks like that on IRC or on IM conversations? I definitely don't. And the people I'm exchanging emails with don't. And that's fine if you're trading pictures of ponies. But it's not ideal if you're trying to solve complex technical and social problems. It's not ideal if you're trying to communicate to a broader audience in a more transmission-only media, which is what a lot of our documentation is. It works for a conversation, more or less. So what do all of those edits give me that I don't have when I just dash off an email? Some of them clarify content. Some of them change the register, so how formal or polite, how informal I'm being. Some of them put in emotion and try and elicit this empathy, get the reader on side, make them feel like, okay, we're doing this together rather than it's me versus you. Make a reader feel happy, make them interested in what we're doing. problem is a lot of times, when I'm on email, even when I'm creating documents that I'm not terribly invested in, we speak with our fingers. And when I'm doing that with somebody I already have a strong relationship with, somebody I know very well, that's fine. But I get their emails as if they were saying them, as if they were speaking them to me, and they get the same thing from me. But when we're writing documentation, we don't have that same relationship with our audience. So you need to be able to inject that emotion back into your text. You need to think about your audience, what mindset they might be in when they've come to your doc. Have they come to your doc because there's already a problem? Or have they come to your doc because they're curious and they don't know anything about your technology? But a huge amount of the text we generate is just dashed off, written in a very similar way to the way we speak. And all of those extra emotional side channels are gone. And that can drastically alter the meaning of what we're trying to communicate. And we don't always remember that communication is not just transmission. You also have to ensure that the message is received. You need to have some kind of a confidence that what you have sent and what is received have approximately the same meaning. Historically, our online communities have often been a fairly social skills free zone, sometimes deliberately so, many of them deliberately so, and we've excused awkwardness or even rudeness. We've labeled it things like autism and Asperger's. This is not a talk about neurodiversity, but one of the things we can learn from the neurodiverse community is that autism spectrum disorders are not synonymous with poor social skills. All kinds of people have to learn social skills in the same way that we learn to read and write, use grammatical constructs. It's easier for some people than for others, but not innately knowing something and not intuitively understanding it the first time you think of it doesn't mean we should give up or not try. I know it can be done because I've done it myself. If you were at ground control last night, you might not believe it, but I'm actually quite shy and introverted. Learning social rules is a process. It's an ongoing process. Sometimes it's exhausting. I like to say that in large groups, I'm running on emulation. Like I'm running in a virtual machine. Things are a little bit slower. I'm not hardwired to be sociable, so I have to think about it, what to do, what to say, where I put my hands, my facial expressions, and sometimes rein in my natural sarcasm and Irish wit. But this talk also isn't just remedial geek socialization. For people who are natural communicators, it's useful to see things from the other side, to understand how the geeks are thinking, how they're misunderstanding, and how to correct for it, along with the special cases that come with online communication. And I think that brings us to the solutions. The rest of this talk is fashioned on the model of Brian Eno's Oblique Strategies. It's a deck of cards to help with creative thinking. It's also an Android app, and I assume an iPhone app, and all of that, and I'd highly recommend it. The idea is if you're stuck on a problem, you pull a card off the deck, and they have these strategies for coming at your problem from a different angle. So things like look at it from the outside, cut a vital connection, listen to the quiet voice. They're all very sort of astrology. It could apply to your situation in whatever way makes sense to you. They're designed not so much as advice, but to remind you of ways to think about the problem. And these strategies that follow are some ways I have found useful to think about my online communication, to make it clearer and easier to understand, and hopefully less likely to lead to misunderstandings. The first one is understand expectations. And the most obvious example of this is in regard to politeness, but it applies to a lot of different aspects of our communication. In the early 90s, Jeff Bigler had a friend at MIT who was regularly finding herself upset by interactions with other people who worked in her lab. And he came up with this idea of a tact filter as a way of talking about those expectations and understanding how his friend and her colleagues were interacting and miscommunicating. And the idea is that some people put tact on their output when they're speaking, and some people put tact on their input when they're listening. And classically, geeks use tact differently from normal people. Most people put tact on their output. We try and be polite to the people that we meet around us. They expect their input already to have tact on it. We don't expect people, generally, to be rude and abrasive. Perhaps in some of our online communities, we do expect that. But by and large in the world, we assume that the people we interact with are going to be polite to us until they have a reason not to. Geeks, on the other hand, tend to put tact on their input. They can't be bothered with all of this nicety. Let's just get to the point. And so they understand that this is how that interaction is, that expectation is set. And it works fine as long as both parties in a conversation have their tact filters set up the same way. The problem is when you have somebody who's expecting tact on the input, and so they're producing output that is not polite necessarily. It can be very brusque, it can be as far as rude. The other way is also problematic when you have tact on both the input and the output, because it can feel like, well, we're not really communicating, nobody's getting to the point, it's all these pleasantries, and there's no actual content. My favorite solution to this is always to have a little bit of tact on your output. You don't have to have, the full range of how polite you'd be when you went home for dinner with, a new partner's parents, but have a little bit of tact on your output. And this is really easy to do. We have templates for this. Honestly, there's quite a lot of them online. But this is one of my favorites for email. Hello, whoever it is. All the things you were going to write anyway. Thanks, my name. That's all it takes. And I know there are a few of you in here who've gotten a lot of emails from me in the past. You look at all my emails. I sign off with, thanks, Noreen. It's as natural to me at this point as writing my name at the bottom of an email. And I don't think about it anymore. It's just, that's my default. And it comes across as more polite. And at the same time, even the most tactless geek can strip it off, can completely ignore it. Obviously, these things have to be adjusted for your audience. You can observe the ongoing level of tact in a group. On a mailing list, maybe reading some posts. At a party, it's conversation surfing. It does take a little bit of work, but a little bit of tact on your output is still a good default. The next strategy I have, 0 is not negative. When emotion is missing from communication, as I mentioned before, it's fairly normal to default to projecting negative emotions. If you can, notice this and stop doing it. If you figure out how to do that, could you find me afterwards and let me know? But ask. If you're not sure if somebody is cross with you, don't respond as if they were cross. Ask them, are they cross? Clarify what they're trying to say. It seems like you think I did a really bad job on this. Is that true? Assume good intent. Assume that the people you're working with, the people who are talking to you, the people who have bothered to give you comments on your doc, want to help you. And if that's not true, there are plenty of places that are hiring. Come and talk to me afterwards. Point out what you're missing. What are these gaps that you're seeing and that you would otherwise fill with negative emotion? And if you think you detect sarcasm, respond with sincerity. This takes a while to learn, but if somebody is being rude and sarcastic to you, respond as nicely and as sincerely and as openly as you can, and it can bring things back on track really, really rapidly. As I mentioned earlier, right and misunderstood is wrong. If you have transmitted a message and a different message has been received, you have not transmitted your message accurately. Make sure that your audience understands what they're reading. I'm a linguist by training. I have a master's in linguistics. So I have a whole barrel of example sentences that are designed to show this problem. How many of you think you understand what this sentence says? It's not a trick question. Like this is a third grade reading level. Most of you should have some idea what this sentence means. How many of you will put up your hands if I ask you to put up your hands? Okay, now let's try that again. How many of you have some idea what the sentence says? Right, okay, that's much better. The thing is, there are 7 different things that this sentence could mean, and none of them are incorrect. All of you who have read one or other meaning into it have read a perfectly valid meaning into it. I didn't say you stole my money. Eric said it. I didn't say you stole my money. I wasn't talking. I didn't say you stole my money, but it does look like it. I didn't say you stole my money, but it was here and now it's not. I didn't say you stole my money. I just think you spent it poorly. I didn't say you stole my money, but you didn't have $50 last night. I didn't say you stole my money. It's my laptop that's missing. So where you put the emphasis can make a huge difference to how you understand that sentence. And when it's written up here like this, you have no idea where the emphasis goes. Obviously, there are 2 ways you can fix that. The simplest and least formal is to highlight where you want to put the emphasis. And in a sentence like this, maybe that's bolding a word. In more formal documents, there are other ways of doing that. But also, when in doubt, rephrase. All of these examples, when in doubt, rephrase. If you need to go and ask somebody, is this sentence grammatical? The answer is, it doesn't matter. Rewrite it. This is one of my favorite and most evil examples. How many of you think you understand this? Because this is a trick question. This one is better, and when I say better, I mean worse. Part of the reason it's hard to understand is because we've removed context. Ship can be a noun or a verb, and we don't mark which is which in English, so this phrase is really ambiguous. And there are a couple of ways to put back the context. Diagrams, pictures, are one way. Being a multilingual writer and being from a very different culture, I am very careful about putting diagrams in documents. Diagrams are a pain to translate, often don't get translated or get translated really poorly. But the other way you have is rewrite it. Use more words. This is a ship used for shipping things like ships, and it's currently shipping things, including a ship that can be used for shipping ships. Take a second to read that and see if it makes more sense than the previous one. It may not make a whole lot of sense, but does it make more sense? A little bit? I know it's early. That's okay. We'll get on to slightly easier points soon. Either way, the important part is the reader is the only thing that matters. When you're writing documentation, make sure your audience understands what you're saying. Communication is not just transmission. You have to make sure that the message is received intact. Back to the emotional side. They don't know how you feel. It's like being back in kindergarten. Have any of you dealt with a small child recently? Small children are absolutely fantastic, but for the first several years don't actually realize that things that they know, you don't magically know. You don't automatically have all of the context that's inside their brain. And they don't necessarily realize that you may have context that's not in their brain, which is great because they think you're just magical. But we also, as adults, have to remember that the readers of our documents can't see us, they can't hear us, they don't know us, they don't know if we're having a good day or a bad day. When we speak, we rely on having all of these emotional side channels, and now they're gone. And that can drastically alter the meaning, and we often don't know why. Sometimes it's awkward to bring back these side channels. Who's played Mass Effect? 1 or 2 people? The Elcor are a species in Mass Effect 2 that communicate emotion using like scent and microsound, and it makes them sound completely flat and monotone to humans. And this can lead to misunderstandings, and because they're very intelligent aliens, they have decided that when they're speaking with non-Elcor, they prefix their statements with emotive statements to clarify the tone. So I'm just going to do the very low-key hack we had yesterday and just play you a little video.
Cross-rumination. To be or not to be? That is the question.
And don't forget to catch Elcor Hamlet live, an unforgettable 14-hour experience.
Insincere endorsement. You have not experienced Shakespeare until you have heard him in the voice of Elcor.
So I wouldn't necessarily suggest insincere endorsement as an emotive attachment that you put with some of your text. I think it's better to have sincere endorsements, ideally. But stating your emotions is a really good way of getting conversations back on track. If a conversation over text isn't going well and you can't figure out why, stating your emotions, stating your assumptions, stating what you're hearing. And this can be as simple as saying, I'm really kind of upset about the way you took this, or I'm bothered by all of these edits you've given me because I think, you're not understanding my point, or you're being too nitpicky, or whatever it is. And this can often be a revelation to the other side that can drag things back on track. They don't have all the context that's in your brain. Paraphrasing what you've heard. I heard you say such and such. Is that what you meant? I have a colleague who says to me, "You're an ass." And what he actually means, no, he says it on a regular basis. And what he actually means is, you've just done something truly brilliant that I'm not sure I could have done. Right? But if he were saying, "You're an ass," and I were hearing, "You're an ass," we'd have a problem. That would not be okay. But he's saying, "You're an ass," and I'm hearing, "Really good job, well done." And so it's great. It's fantastic. I love being told I'm an ass by this one person, okay? This is not a general invitation. It's important to establish relationships with the people you're working and communicating with. And you can establish relationships with groups. You can establish a relationship with your audience even without knowing them individually and personally. But you do have to have a back and forth. Emoticons. This, for those of you who haven't come across this before, this is the table flipping rage emoticon. It's possibly not the clearest example, but I like it a lot. Some people consider these emoticons childish. They're actually really powerful, compact indicators of emotion. They're not going to be suitable for formal docs, but for emails, for more conversational interchanges, they can be really useful. Particularly, I've found when you're doing support, smiley faces, "You are my customer, I love you," can be great. Again, not ideal for the documentation particularly, but for other kinds of communication, increase the empathic bandwidth. Again, if the conversation is going badly and you're not sure why, switch to a medium that has more capacity for transmitting that emotional connection. So real life is obviously the best one for this. I come from Ireland, so the solution is let's have a pint. It can be a pint of whatever you'd like. I would not recommend whiskey, although that has possibly happened once or twice. But pints of Coke are also perfectly fine. If you can't get together in real life, can you do a video? If you can't do a video, can you at least talk to somebody on the phone? Pick up the phone and call them instead of having these emails back and forth where you're getting more and more angry with each other. IM or IRC can be a little bit difficult if you're dealing with people who don't share your native language. Sometimes the real-timeness of that makes it harder for them because they're typing in a second language. Please have a little bit of empathy there and maybe skip straight over to the voice. But adding in expressions, inflection, tone, and that ability to connect with a human, that ability to recognize that the person you're working with is actually a person, it's the fastest way to pass the Turing test is to pick up the phone. This is why conferences are so valuable. If you can get, your core users in a room, do it, absolutely do it. More flame wars are solved by a 5-minute conversation than by any other means. Perception is reality. If someone feels attacked, they're going to stop listening. It doesn't matter anymore what your intention was. It doesn't matter what you said. It doesn't matter whether they're feeling attacked because they had a bad day, they lost their keys this morning, the toast was burnt, whatever. If they feel like you're trying to get at them, they will shut down and stop listening. And you have to get them back on side before you can do any more technical content. Technical content can't get through when the emotions have shut things down. So listen to what they're saying, don't second guess them, set expectations. So explain where we're trying to get to. We can talk this out. Do you need to take a break? Whatever it is. But you have to deal with that. And you have to deal with the fact that it's not. The reality is not what you were trying to get across. The reality for this person, for the person you're talking to, is they're having a bad day. You need to deal with that before you can get on to technical content. I'm being told I have to take questions, although I think questions probably work better one-to-one, but we'll just do 1 or 2 more. It's not a competition. This is more for emails. Rate limit what you're sending. Active isn't always better than passive. This is a good one, even for your documentation. I know we have this idea that we shouldn't use the passive. I disagree. English has this amazing feature where we actually have sort of 2 passives. We can say, you broke the build. That's not getting anybody on side. Like I said, perception is reality. That's going to make someone feel attacked and we're done. Someone broke the build. The build broke. In German, if you were to say the build broke, or as is more commonly used in linguistics classes, the window broke, that's actually a classic grammatical mistake that children make in their development when they're learning German. It's not a valid construct in that language. In English, we can say the window broke, the build broke. It just happened out of nowhere, I don't know. And then we can get on with fixing it. Similarly, if you're writing documentation and you're explaining an error case, if this has happened, not if you have broken the build, if the build has broken, here's how we can deal with it. When you're wrong, say so. When the other person is right, say so. When you're right, shut up. Right? If you're actually right, someone else will realize and point it out. When the other person is wrong, shut up. Point out the brokenness. Don't point out that they're wrong. We're all human. Provide people an out. Don't corner them. Competence is more likely than incompetence. Again, these are just strategies. They're ways to think about it. I can tell you what I think about these strategies, but you can also use them without having my commentary. This is my last one and my favorite one. If it doesn't matter, do it their way. If it doesn't matter and you still want to do it your way, either you're just arguing for the sake of arguing, in which case stop that, or it does matter and you have to explain why. Get onto the conversation about why it matters. And now, questions. Do we have any? Is anybody awake? We have a few people awake, okay. Yep. Just beside you, Eric. Don't go too far. Yeah.
This is more a comment, but I noticed that some of my coworkers from particular countries are more likely to start a IM conversation with, "Hi Lois, how are you?" and then go on, whereas other people will start with, "Can you do this?"
Yep.
But on the other hand, the people who start with, "Hi, how are you?" I almost feel a bit guilty because I'm not necessarily always like that myself. So what's the appropriate, how do you gauge that appropriate level of introductory?
I worked at Google for a long time, and at Google the solution to this was there was an internal web page describing the solution, and then you put in your chat status whether you preferred people to start with the politeness, or whether you prefer them to just get to the damn point, which is a very engineering at scale solution. And I think Ashley is going to talk later about how Google does things at scale. I think as long as people understand that you're not being rude when you just jump straight into the question, and you understand that this is their preferred way of communicating, they would like to put in that politeness. I think with colleagues, you'll work it out pretty fast whether you're upsetting someone. And if you're upsetting someone, you can either start putting in the politeness, or you can sit them down and explain to them, I'm not trying to be rude, this is how I prefer to work. But conversations, more communication is better. Other questions?
I have one.
Yeah.
Your talk is giving me a lot of feelings. And what I really want to hear, and I don't know if you want to talk about this, is the gender analysis of the last 5 minutes of what you just said. So
the gender analysis of politeness and that kind of thing, or?
Politeness versus directness, engaging in arguments versus, versus being the person who always is the one to disengage the argument. I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah, that's a deeply, deeply complicated question, and I have 5 minutes. But what I will say, it is, and it's something I'm very happy to talk about later on. I'm easy to find, so y'all should come and find me if you want to talk about that. But yes, classically, we train our women to do this and our men not to. I think it's important for all of us to be able to do this. I also think it's particularly important for those of us who have been socialized as women to be the ones to back off, that we not always back off, that we get our point across. Sadly, women will get their point across better if they're perceived as being nice. They will do better if they're perceived as being nice. I have taken hits in my career and will continue to take hits in my career because I would rather be competent than nice. This is a huge problem. I can't solve it in 5 minutes. But send more of the men you work with to my talks. Seriously, because I will sit them down and give them the slap down. There is no reason that women are not inherently better at this. Men are not inherently worse. This is not inherently harder for men. Just get on it.
Just a comment, you only went 3 levels deep on the build is broken. You forgot the agonized scream followed by a series of curse words.
Oh, you know what? I've spent most of my professional life working with ops people. That goes way, way, way down, including the levels of niceness of the whiskey the developers should be buying you, depending on how broken the build. Yeah, no, again, let's take that conversation to the pub. Any more questions?
Yeah, back here.
Just wanted to say, great talk. Thank you very much. And also, the thing that I've learned personally about when you're talking about stating your emotions to get the conversation back on track, it's really important to state your own emotions and not say, you're being whatever.
Yeah,
That's
great
really
point.
key. Thank you.
Yes.
Any more questions and/or comments? Okay.
Great.
Thanks so much.
Thank you all.